Good afternoon, and welcome to Unlock the Door Radio. This is your host, Michael Cross here. Hopefully, giving you an hour of very stimulating topics that will get you to be thinking and pondering, well, political and social and life's issues this week. Well, just as an introduction, um, in my books, the Freedom from Conscience series, there is a topic that comes up in the second book that it's controversial. It's getting more acceptance now, but still, I deal with a lot of the concerns and so forth in regards to the two main characters and their discussions dealing with the subplot of what it would be like to start a family together as two women. And then on top of that, I'm really, really interested, as you know, people have seen in past shows, in biotechnology. That's one of my favorite subjects. And from my understanding, artificial insemination, IVF, and other technologies are allowing women, and not just heterosexual women, but also gay women, the chance to have a lot more choices in regards to, well, starting families and, getting into the whole blessings of children. So today, I have a very special guest, Stela Cole, who will give us a lot of more information about, well, what's involved in being a same-sex parent. Stela, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, traditionally I just let people go off and start taking over. So tell us who you are and well, what brings you here today?
Sure. You invited me to the show, Mike, I understand, because I'm lesbian who is married to another woman, and we have a son together. I come from the U.S., and we live in Sweden. My wife is Swedish. So what I can share with you is colored by my American background and now our life here in Sweden. So the choices that we've had here aren't necessarily the same that other women in my position will have in other countries. But I'm happy to share a little bit about some of the the road to parenthood, essentially, and what kind of help we had along the way, what thoughts we had, what kind of planning we did, and some of the sort of humoristic stories that were a part of our journey.
All right. Well, I guess the best place to start with a journey is the very first step. So, well, how did this all begin? From day one on.
Okay. Day one is maybe I'll define that kind of broadly. Day one for me was maybe when I was 19 or 20. Before I realized that I myself was a lesbian, I knew I wanted to have kids. It just seemed like a natural thing for me to build a family and to share love in a way that you can only do through raising a child and seeing the world again through the child's eyes. My desire to have a family grew stronger as my biological clock ticked through my 30s, and at the age of 35, I guess I was thinking, wow, gosh, it's now or never. At that point, I was single. At 36, I met my wife to be again. So I said that it was hard to define day one because when my wife and I first talked about having kids, we were not at all a couple. We were, in fact, colleagues working together for the UN. And I remember drinking tea with her. She was one of the few women in this collaborative international workforce that we had. And her views on having children were totally dark and colored by her experiences as a child, which she didn't have a very she had childhood, abusive childhood. She said at that point, I would never want to bring a child into this world. This world is overpopulated. Kids take up far too many resources. why on earth would you want to have a baby in this world and introduce it to all the problems that we have? And I thought to myself on my way home that night, oh my God, if she's the last lesbian on earth, I won't have anything to do with her. My thought had always been it was a beautiful thing to have a child, and that if I'm a loving parent, then I have so much to give to the world through having a child. So we were on different planets when it came to that day one. But when we met again, then I realized that philosophy she had would be something we would have to work on in our relationship before we were ready to talk about having children again. In the meantime, I attended these meetings that I was living in the U.S. and I attended so-called maybe baby meetings with other lesbians in the region where I lived that were exploring the idea of having children. And at those meetings, we had guest speakers, other people from the community that previously had belonged to this group that did things like, they had explored which sperm banks they could use, or a gay couple, two men, had come in and talked about the issues they had had with the legal issues of ensuring that both partners were recognized as parents, and that they could, in case something happened to the other partner, that they could take care of the child, that they would have the legal right to do so. Things like this. And I remember when my wife first came to that meeting, she still was colored by her philosophy that nobody should bring a child into the world. So the introductions that day went something like this. Hi, welcome to Maybe Baby. My name is so-and-so, and I have what you might call baby fever. And the next person said about the same thing, had this total enthusiasm for being a mom. And then we came to my wife, who said, my name is so-and-so. And I'm just here for Stella's sake. I have never had a baby before in my life. And the air pretty much went out of the room. Because I think it's a big and sensitive deal for lesbians and gay people to talk about having a child, to dare to talk about the fact that they could become parents, and to allow themselves to see themselves in that way. That had something to do with why the air went out of the room just then. So day one could have been on any of those days, Mike. And yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I've known heterosexual couples in the same boat where the wife really wants to have kids and the husband doesn't. So I guess it's just something that's just part of couple dynamics nowadays.
Yeah, there's a lot that I can't say. Actually, it's a human experience to have not have a meeting of minds from the beginning. That's so normal. But then there's a reason we have a pride parade in many big cities around the world once a year. And some people say it's because that's the one day you don't hate yourself. You allow yourself to be who you are. Hopefully, most gay people have sort of a pride moment at least once every day. But for gay people, there can be that added stress over the human experience.
Okay. Well, the next question has to be, how did your wife change her mind?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. And I was afraid you would ask me that. Well, I think the answer has to do with our many conversations about being together. I wasn't willing to be with her if she wasn't willing to at least say from her heart that she could think of having a baby together. And those conversations stretched over 4 years. 3 years. And during those 3 years, we had many tumultuous experiences together, where she first moved to the U.S. for 1 year, and as a student, because that was the only way she could get a visa. That's a hardship for gay and lesbian couples. It's hard to have grounds for a visa, or it was hard for us to have grounds for a visa before the Defense of Marriage Act was repealed. But anyway, she was a student in the U.S. for 1 year and spent all of her savings to be a student. And was not what she wanted to do. She took a year off of her work to do that. Essentially, it was, and during that time, I was working 13, 14 hours a day. Then I moved, after that year, I followed her back to Sweden. And during that time, I had my own identity crisis and troubles with the language and with fitting in and with finding a job that suited me. And my skills, which I'd worked so hard to get an education and in my field, and then I couldn't really use it in Sweden. So I say all of this because we ended up splitting up, and I moved back to the States for 6 months. And during that time, I think I realized that my wife, for me, was the person I was meant to be with. And I think she realized the same thing. So at that point, we were willing to fight for each other, dreams to a certain extent. So there were a lot of pieces to why she now could think of having a child together, and there was a lot of growing there around issues that maybe made it harder for us to communicate. We actually ended up, when I moved back to Sweden, we ended up hiring somebody that we called our love coach, and her job was to give us tools to communicate about the hard things that are hard to communicate, like can I give you an example? It's hard for my wife to communicate what she wants or what she doesn't want, what I do that she doesn't like. And when you're parents, you need to be able to your partner, but for your child. So the idea was that this love coach would prepare us to be a married couple, but also to be parents.
Okay, sounds like you guys could write your own book.
Yeah, we've talked about it.
Okay, so fast forward however much time that was, you and your wife are contemplating the idea of having a child, but of course that's going to take, I would assume, more planning than, let's say, a heterosexual couple that suddenly decides, let's have a baby. So give the audience an idea of the steps that you had to take in that regard.
Okay, well, as I said, since I was 19, 20, I knew I wanted to have a child. And when I was 35, then I thought I need to get my act together and start reading up on this, and I need to know what steps I need to take. I was single at that time. This is no problem. I'll be a single mom, because I'd been dating all that time, but I never really found somebody that I could build it. So there were a few books that I read, not particular to being gay or lesbian, particular to parenthood and planning for parenthood. And one big piece of advice was that I should start to eat right. So I dieted for having a child. I didn't drink any alcohol. This sounds really extreme. I quit drinking any alcohol, cut back on caffeine. So I think I was caffeine free for about 3 years. And this is over time, from 35 to 39. And I was very aware of the fruits and vegetables I ate, that they were ecological, and that I wasn't putting any other kinds of toxins into my body. And that was one thing. The other thing was the exterior.
Okay, real quick here. You were in America or Sweden when you were cutting out the GMOs and the stuff like that?
Oh, U.S.
Oh, that would have been tough.
Yeah. But my awareness and what I was able to accomplish kind of increased in Sweden, I guess you could say. But then there was the part about the actual insemination. What sperm would I use? Whose sperm would I use? Would I know the guy? Did I want to know the guy? How much did I want to know about him if I didn't know him directly? Um, looking into which sperm banks were available. And oh, I guess I should back up. When it had to do with my body, I also started charting all of my rhythms, all of the signs that I was fertile at a certain time. And they're good books about that, none of which I can recall their names right now, but it's good to read up on, for lesbians at least, to read up on when they're fertile in order to be able to plan the insemination, which can be an expensive and emotional process. So then when it came to insemination, I researched sperm banks, mostly because I thought if I couldn't find a man that I wanted to be sort of like Uncle Jack or Uncle Bob or something, I didn't want to share the parenthood. I wanted to have somebody who could be maybe in the child's life, but not be able to claim parental rights. That's tricky, and cannot entirely give up his parental rights by contracting them out. It's at least not in the U.S. So I would have to have a friend that I trusted, and I didn't have a friend that I wanted him to both be the uncle, where I could appreciate every single aspect of who he was, that I could invite him to be the donor. So I looked into these sperm banks in California, New York, Washington, and Iowa. And the information I could get in the U.S. ranged from, I could see the man's penmanship, I could see his philosophy on life, I could get all kinds of information about his physical characteristics, his eye color, his hair color, more information about what he does today, what job he has, what level of education. All of that I could get in the U.S. A lot of what was available to me, at least immediately, changed when I moved to Sweden to be with my wife. And the information, so I guess we could have mail ordered the sperm, and then it would have come on ice to us through the mail, and we could have inseminated at home. But by the time we were ready to inseminate, I was, by the time we were talking about inseminating, I was 39. And it felt like we should just do the safest thing we could do. In Sweden, there's a possibility of being inseminated for free by the government, and in order to get in line for that service, you have to be a certain age. I can't remember. I think it's under 40. And it was good that we knew that the line was about 2 years long. So that option was out for us. The next option was to go to a private clinic, and be inseminated. I think the cost for that was about 8,000 kroner, which is how much is that one?
It's about
A little over
$1,000 US.
Yeah. So that was an expensive, but really the only one that was available to us if we took out the other two options. And there were two places we could inseminate then: very, very far north in Sweden, or just south of Sweden over the border into Denmark. There was a clinic called the Stork Clinic. So we went there and we did an interview with the people there. They wanted to make sure we were ready to be parents, and then they wanted to be sure that we understood the whole process of inseminating with them. It was basically a half an hour process with the midwife. They lit candles, they played a little bit of music, and you could order the sperm. You could book the whole meeting only when you knew. I could book the meeting only when I knew that I was fertile. Now, here's how it went. We had talked about starting in January with this whole process, but because of some doctor's appointments that I had, I found out that I would have an egg on the way in exactly 2 days from the doctor's appointment that I had, according to the doctor. and there was no doubt in the doctor's mind that the egg would come in 2 days. So I wanted to call and book this appointment right away. This was in October, the January before we said we would inseminate. That's our dog. So they wouldn't book in the appointment, and I told Jenny, I told my doctor, Jenny, that we would try to come anyway, and so we booked the train ticket down to this clinic, and without having an appointment. Appointments went pretty fast, so we had to call from the train when I knew when. Basically, I would know that I was fertile after peeing on a fertility stick, essentially, where it's plus if you're fertile, negative if you're minus if you're not fertile. So we're on this train. It's totally packed with people. I can't loud, and they answer, hello, it's the Stork Clinic, and I say, yeah, I'm calling to book an appointment, and then they say, okay, an appointment for what? And I'm thinking, oh my God, do I have to say this in front of all of these people? Well, an appointment for making a baby. She said, what? I said, an appointment for insemination. I'm thinking everybody on the train is trying not to look straight at me because they're all listening. And then she says, okay, how do you know you can make the appointment? And I said, because I did a fertility test. And she said, what test did you take to know that you're fertile? And I said, oh, I peed on a stick and it showed positive. And by this time, I'm trying to talk through my teeth, but I know everyone's listening. Okay, she says, so we need to know, have you picked out the sperm yet? And I thought, oh no. Something in me said, just chance it, tell her whatever. But I had to ask my wife, what would you like? What sperm would you like? I asked her in front of all of these people. And she said, take a tall one. So I said, we like a tall one, please. It felt oddly like ordering a pizza and this is how we booked our appointment and had the insemination. And at the end of the insemination, the midwife patted me on the back and said, here we have a pregnant woman. And she was right. It took one try.
Oh, excellent. How lucky.
I know.
I've heard it usually takes like 6 tries to.
It can be.
Yeah. The thing is, it sounds like then that America, you can kind of choose anything and everything about a donor. Sweden, I guess you can't really choose what you want. I guess the doctor does that for you. And Denmark, you get somewhere in between, you get some of the information, but like the tall guy or something.
Yeah, that's right. In Sweden, the donor would have been completely anonymous. In Denmark, the information we asked on our way out the door, what information do you have about this donor? And they said they wrote down just on a little piece of paper that how tall he was, his hair color, and his eye color, and that was it.
Okay.
And that was information we could get. I can also say that the donor is not anonymous. When our son is 18 years old, or if he has a serious illness that might lead to death, and in those two situations, he can contact the donor, and he has a right to have one coffee with the donor.
Okay, so that's at 18 years of age. Then the person can make a choice as to whether they want to meet the person who is the biological father.
Right. My son can meet him. Well, he has one time.
Okay.
Or get his information if the man is no longer living. So in that way, he can find out a little bit about who he is biologically.
Okay. What does that sound like something that you would encourage, or is it something that maybe it's one of those things you're just kind of looking at, well, when he's 18, I hope this is a nice guy or something?
Yeah, well, that's a good question because friends of ours have definitely not wanted that. They haven't wanted to have anybody else in the picture because that simply is not somebody that's part of the family for them. This is just a biological transaction for them. But for me, I have my brother-in-law was adopted, and he's gone through, I think, a fair bit of personal questioning. Who am parents look like and what do they like to do? This is my biological parents, I should have said. In this case, it's similar. I wonder if my son, in growing up, will wonder what this man who contributed his biology to my son's being, who he is and what he does, and why I don't know why my son has certain traits. I don't know what questions he might come up with, but it's his choice. It's not my choice to take away from the beginning. That's how I view this. That's why we went with the donor that my son could contact when he's an adult.
Okay, another question is this. I mean, if you and your wife were to choose to have another child,
Mm-hmm.
if you went to that clinic, would you be able to use the same donor?
Yeah, well, here's how that works. At this particular clinic, we would have to tell them that we're now interested in having another donor. I can't remember if we can on hold. I think that might be the case. But as long as supplies last, we are allowed uh, to request and get the same sperm again. So we have a priority there, I guess you could say. But if we don't buy the sperm now, then there's no promise that there will be that same sperm on supply when we try again, which we probably won't. But that's how that works at that clinic.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't want to get too much into the sperm bank thing, but I suppose that would be interesting for your son to, someday maybe even to find out how many siblings he has.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing. We did get a donor number, and apparently there was a heterosexual couple and a homosexual couple we know. We're comparing notes one day about their kids and they were saying how much they looked alike, and they got to talking about that they had in fact both inseminated and at the same clinic, and then they got curious about it and they saw that they had the same donor number. So I don't know to what extent the clinic can or is willing to facilitate our son meeting his biological siblings, but they do have meetings where parents that were successful with their insemination can come back and meet other families. So that's one possibility if we don't just happen to meet another couple where they have a child that looks a lot like ours.
Hmm. I'm wondering. It, this happens, of course, with all couples. I mean, there's probably more couples that go about having a child this way who are heterosexual, going into clinics just by mere numbers, where the husband's sterile. But does this create any special issues, where you have one person who's the biological parent and the spouse who isn't?
Yeah, that's a good question because I know that when our son was born, my wife's mom, one of the first things she said when she met our son was, "Oh, gosh," she said to my wife, it's too bad it's just too bad he's not your son," and that hit her emotionally very hard. But that is the only time I think she didn't feel like our son is her son. All other times, ironically, most people who meet our family guess and comment on who just how much my wife and our son look alike, and that he doesn't look at all like me. So it hasn't. I don't know. I guess you'd have to ask my wife that question, but I don't know that it's been an issue for her. And just here's the unique thing about being a lesbian family: both of us could have had a child, but she didn't want to. Biologically, she just didn't want to pass on uh, her own genes. I guess that has to do with her childhood, but no, it hasn't been a bigger issue than that for in our family. We do have a friend who inseminated. She was married to a man, and they decided that she would inseminate because he had cancer, and he in fact died before their child was born. But she still says that his family is the child's family. So that, there are all kinds of constellations when it comes to why family constellations result from or are driven by different family needs and wants.
Mm-hmm. So the laws, I guess the laws vary state by state in the United States, but in Sweden, if something were to happen to you, then your wife would just be seen just in the context of being the spouse and then have custody, wouldn't she?
No, not necessarily. If we hadn't taken any further steps after our son was born, my wife would not have been seen as our son's mother, not automatically. And this is a difference in Swedish law. Swedish law is pretty egalitarian, I guess you could say. It's pretty equal between couples in different situations, gay couples and straight couples. But when it comes to exactly our situation, we found out that the law wouldn't treat us the same way as a heterosexual couple. When I say our situation, I mean the birth mom comes from another country. The extra parent, I guess you want to say the other parent, is coming from Sweden. The insemination happened in Denmark. Just with those factors, if we had been a straight couple, then my husband would have automatically become the father. But in our situation, in order for my wife to become the mother legally, we had to go through an adoption process. And the adoption process entailed someone coming to our house from the municipality where we live and examining the environment and interviewing my wife to see if she was an appropriate parent and to see if the environment which she was a part of was an appropriate environment for her to adopt my son, our son, essentially. But according to the state, it was my son. So yeah, we had to go through an adoption process, and after that process was over, we even wrote to the State Department in Washington, D.C. to change our son's birth certificate so that both of our names were on the birth certificate. And that gave my wife all the rights of a parent in both countries and perhaps beyond both countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's complicated. I was reading that I have an interest in the biotechnology stuff, and that it's kind of the same thing. If you and your wife had chosen to have a male friend donate, then it has something to do with he would have had to have claimed to be the father when the child was born, and then sign a paper asking the state to allow your wife to adopt the child. Is that correct for Sweden?
Yeah, I'm impressed that you know that bit of the. I skipped over one step, which was there was an investigation into who the real father was, and and that investigation was essentially the only piece of evidence that you'll find in the folder on that investigation was the little receipt that we sent from the start clinic, and but you're right. If we had if we had accepted sperm from a donor we knew, then he would have in some way had to have written over. I don't know how that would have worked, actually. I just know that there was an investigation into the fatherhood of the child. That was how they termed it. So a good question. I don't know if the man in that case can actually write over his parent rights. I don't know if what the answer to just that part of the question is.
I think he can ask that someone else assume the rights. It's kind of like saying, okay, I am the father, but I would like to trade and give these rights to someone else in that case.
Mm.
I guess the irony is that, if you're a husband-wife couple, then it's just assumed. The baby's born and it's automatic. The man is listed as the father. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no question about that. In fact, if you want to change that in case the man feels like it's not his child, then he has to go through a process by which that's listed that way. So it seems like a little discrimination there to me.
Yeah, it was. And we actually ended up sending in a complaint to the ombudsperson who deals with this kind of discrimination in Sweden. It was a hefty file that I sent in with all of the different investigations we'd been through and how much money it cost us and extra effort and stress, actually, because my son, during the time we waited to get this okay back from the adoption process, he was considered to be stateless. He didn't belong to Sweden, and he didn't belong to the U.S. until we went to the U.S. Embassy to get him a passport. And so in that time we waited, he didn't have any protection of a certain government.
Wow.
Crazy.
Amazing. But yet, if you had just gotten pregnant, these would not have probably been the same issues. If you do it, I mean, many women in Sweden do get pregnant and don't even know who the father is, and yet it doesn't seem like they do investigations in those cases. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, if I had well, either way, I wanted my wife to have the parenting rights, and that was the issue. But there, just the fact that I came from another country added another element. So, yeah, there were a lot of moving pieces there.
Okay. The next step I'd like to take then is, well, there's obviously going to be some people who are going to, and I've even heard some people I've known, people I've been associates with who've been either lesbian or bisexual, who have questioned if the child has the same abilities if raised in a home in which it's a lesbian couple or a gay male couple. Have you run across studies and so forth that have dealt with this issue of how the kids turn out?
Well, no. I guess, have I run across studies? Yes, I have. It's kind of impossible not to be interested in being a parent and not catch a headline here or there in the news that I come across. But I haven't looked closer into it because for me personally, I think that the single thing that is best in raising a child isn't whether you have someone with an XX chromosome and someone else with an XY chromosome raising the child, but it's just how much love are you giving the child. And so there was never really a question about that for me that I needed to be able to answer. But since you ask, I can say somebody else has answered the question. I'm reading a book right now called My Two Moms by Zach Walls. Zach Walls is that young guy whose speech to the Iowa state legislature went viral on YouTube. He said to the chairman and the committee that was considering some legislation that was going to restrict the definition of marriage, I think it was, in the state of Iowa, that his nobody has independently come upon the fact that he was raised by two women. It's impossible for anyone to tell that. He said there's so I guess I have anecdotes and not really studies that I've been encouraged by. And this anecdote is told in Zach Wall's book, My Two Moms. And the subtitle to the book is Lessons of Love, Strength, and What Makes a Family. I can say that there are some funny things I could tell you about, in raising my son, who's now just over 2. We had a visitor. We've had a couple visitors, really good friends of mine, who are gay men. And in fact, one of these friends, I did ask once if he wanted to be the donor. He was living in the States, and I knew we were living here. But he said no, because he would have wanted to have an active part in our child's life. And that wasn't possible from the U.S. Anyway, he came to visit. And at that point, my son was starting to talk. And he calls my wife and I mama and mom. But when this friend came to visit, he said, Papa. And, that's, of course, a little sensitive, because I had asked him if he wanted to be the donor. But it just, so I got a little embarrassed, and I said, no, his name is so-and-so. But later, a couple of days later, we were out in the park playing with some other kids my son's age. And I was sitting there talking to the parents, the papas to these kids that were playing with my son. And they said, we were talking about, what have you had any, have you noticed that your kids really need to say mama and papa? It's kind of a funny conversation, but he said, I've noticed this. One other parent said, I've noticed that my kid refers to all women as mama and all men as papa. So that when we were watching the Olympics together, he said, Papa, why are all of those why are all of the mamas and papas running around with big pens? He meant javelins. but it's hilarious. Kids, they're not programmed with the need to have a mama and a papa. They're programmed with the need to have love and support and discover who they are on their very own, with as much support and love as possible from the parents that they have. So that's I didn't answer your study directly about studies, but that's my that's the view that's colored my own parenting.
Well, it seems too that, it would be difficult in a same-sex relationship to have, accidentally get pregnant. It's something you have to really desire to do. You have to go through a lot of steps. And obviously you're showing that you want to have a child. You want to provide a good atmosphere.
Right. And so it's extremely intentional. There were signs here in Sweden when Stockholm Pride happened. That's the biggest event of all events in Sweden, any time of all kinds of events. Stockholm Pride is the biggest. And they have really fun advertisements, I think, thought-provoking and a little controversial sometimes. But this last year, their advertisements had a sort of a theme. Did you know that? Or fact number 501. I can't remember. But this was a fact number, such and such. And the fact was the kids of gay parents know that they were chosen, that they were intentionally brought to being. And that was something that was meant to help bolster pride, and indeed it did. There were a lot of parents that picked up on that poster and thought it was really positive. But you said that a lesbian parent can't become pregnant accidentally, and I just thought of one thing I should maybe name, which was I was in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, and I met a lot of other lesbians during that time who were Dominican. And I thought it was interesting that one of them was a mom, and she was a mom, of course, intentionally. But her way of inseminating was to seduce somebody in a bar, seduce a man in a bar, and at the right time when she was fertile, and to ensure she got pregnant from that. And I've really struggled with the morality behind that versus her deep desire to have a child. I I can't speak for women who are in a situation where they would never be able to live out their life dreams because of the way the country's norms and regulations and laws are written. But yeah, that was the way she chose to become a mom and made it happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't say there's probably heterosexual women who've done the same thing as well.
Yeah, true enough.
Now, you mentioned the real quick. That just brings up one thing I just wanted to ask, and that is the the when you do go through and get donation, are you able to, like for instance in Sweden and Denmark and so forth, are you given a do you have the desire to find someone that looks like the opposite sex parent or something like that? So like if you want to have the child seem like it's binding to both parents in that at least when it comes to the looks, is that possible, or is it just kind of like you said, he's this tall and does this for a living?
Yeah, that would have been possible for us in Denmark. We could have said eye color and hair color. And it's also, well, in Sweden, when you are inseminated by the government and that's part of this free program. I think it's 3 inseminations you get. If you're under 40, you can receive 3 inseminations as part of the health care here. In that case, no, you're not. The donor is entirely anonymous, and you're not allowed to choose. But I have a friend in one of our mama groups that got inseminated, and I think that the doctors and midwives secretly made an effort to have the donor in that case look like the other partner, the same sex partner.
Oh, okay.
And so the kids actually do look like both.
Now, this gets in also to the idea of when how how do you think Swedish society, and then I'm going to turn to American because you're American. How do you think Swedish society and American society currently, this very moment, differ in regards to, well, how will your child be treated, like during the Swedish version of PTA meetings? When you do have you come in and talk to the teachers, and that starts at a very young age in Sweden, from my understanding. So is it more just like, oh, okay, well, this child just happens to have 2 mothers? In Sweden, in America, I think that might be a little different, but what are your impressions?
My impression is, okay, so there are 2 things. There are norms and there are laws, like social norms. So if you're talking about social norms, then I would say that the question of whether the parents are gay or straight has become a non-issue. And this is in a large city in Sweden. I don't know how it is out in the countryside. I think it must be much harder. But it's if you demonstrate that you're willing to make some kind of a discriminatory or that you're willing to treat same-sex parents in a discriminatory way, you're showing out loud that and for all the world to see that you're a real bigot, and that doesn't go well in Sweden. So I haven't really come across the issue face to face. And I think that my wife and I at these meetings, development conversations that you have starting at the age of 2 in Sweden at preschools, we're involved in the equivalent of PTA, parent teacher associations here. We're involved in ensuring that the teachers, that the parents give the teachers small presents all the time. There's been not even the slightest hint of discrimination or difference in the way that we're treated at all. Then there are the laws, and the laws in Sweden are extremely favorable to parenting. But there's more than that. They're also favorable to putting same-sex couples together with other same-sex couples when they are pregnant. So when I was pregnant with our son, we were introduced through the clinic that I was going to for my own health, during the pregnancy. I was introduced to, and my wife was introduced to, a group of other women, including one man, that were going to become parents and that were pregnant. The man was involved because he was a known donor and a friend to one of the women that was pregnant, and they had inseminated with his sperm. So he was going to become the father, and they would then take turns parenting. So through this group, we had courses that were provided to us by law on things like, have you considered that you each of the moms can nurse, for example? These are issues that don't come up in straight couples. Plus, we were introduced to other things that are common for parents here in Sweden, which is like, think about how you'll be as a parent and what you want to teach your child and in which ways, and think about how you want the birth to go, and maybe you could write a birth letter if you want to, with instructions on how specific needs you have, or how specific desires you have for the birth. So that was very interesting for me to be able to be a part of that. And in Sweden, where it's otherwise hard to make friends, there aren't really any openings to make friends because all of your friends are made, earlier in life. Suddenly there was a social boom. And through this mama group, I could make all kinds of friends. But we were also in such a similar situation that we could bond. It was wonderful. We also, according to law, had the right to go to a specific hospital where the staff had been trained in GLBT, lesbian, bisexual, transgender competence, and then they were given training on how, not insisting that there be a mom and a papa, for example, and respecting that there would be a same-sex couple coming in for the delivery and things like that. So there's a difference there in Sweden compared with the U.S.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have any concerns as to whether your child will be teased or something because he has 2 moms?
Yeah, no, that's possible. And that I know a lot less about because he's only 2 now. And that's even more possible outside of the big cities in Sweden.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I mean, kids get, teased for lots of things. And so as long as there's emotional support at home, I don't think that there'd be any problems with that. I mean, in the sense that, he can get the strengthening and so forth to be able to like this other gentleman. What was the book he wrote?
Oh, My Two Moms.
Yeah, it sounds. I mean, I've seen the video. It sounds like he turned out perfectly okay.
He writes about being mobbed, I guess you say, being teased, and being a little bit of an outsider for having 2 moms. But he grew up in and around rural Iowa, so I think it's pretty different. In the U.S., it's pretty different too. In my family, anyway, it feels like it's kind of the men who make most of the decisions, and it's kind of a more it's more of a man's world in the US in some ways. So I could see how having two moms might be considered to be less macho
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps even less worthy. And that's just talking about social norms. And if we were to move back, which we might do, then we'll have to deal with a whole different culture and level of acceptance.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hey, we got about 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
For those people, for especially, I mean, there are gay and lesbian people out there who they really love kids. They have even, thinking of having kids, but maybe societal pressure, especially if they're, in America or so forth, might cause them to think maybe this is a decision I shouldn't make. Maybe this is something I shouldn't do. What advice would you give them in regards to uh, this desire they have to have a family, but yet feel maybe some pressure that it doesn't conform to the society at large?
Yeah, well, this is your life to live. You have one shot at it. If you have love to give, ensure you clean up the reasons why you don't think you should have a child. Ensure that you can address those for yourself so that you can live the life you're meant to live. Um, if that includes being a parent, there's nobody that can stop you, essentially. There are always places where you can seek assistance in getting insemination, and there are always places, uh, books and internet spaces where you can seek the information you need to get through to the support that you seek. But it is good for any parent to think about, why do I feel like I shouldn't be a parent? It is good for any parent to develop an awareness about that and to address that. That was the reason we had a love coach, and that's the reason we enjoy having a group of lesbian moms to be able to compare notes with, and yeah, and that's why it's great too that my own family has been so supportive. Um, so don't let anybody stop you from living your dreams. And if you're somebody who has a lot of love to give, well, you have a lot to give the world. Part of this through being a parent in the future.
Well, it sounds like your son is not only are you and your wife blessed, but your son's going to be really blessed as well.
Yeah, he gives us a lot back, so it feels like it was the world's best decision.
Great, great. Well, I really, really want to thank you for sharing your time with us today, Stella.
Thanks so much, Mike. It was good to be here.
Okay, well, and that concludes another episode of Unlock the Door Radio. I hope you'll return back next week for another interesting and thought-provoking episode. Thanks now.